At 0900 on July 4, 1943, Private First Class Evan Evans crouched behind sandbags on Renova Island, watching 16 Japanese Betty bombers emerge through torn clouds over Blanche Channel. 23 years old, 3 weeks into this muddy nightmare, 0 aircraft brought down. The bombers were heading straight for what the Marines grimly called Suicide Point. 2 days earlier, 59 Americans had died on that same stretch of beach. The Japanese had launched 18 bombers and 40 fighters on July 10. Renova's radar sets had been knocked out by an earlier strike. No early warning, no chance to prepare. The bombers came in low over the water at 1,400 hours. They struck fuel stores first, then ammunition, then the field hospital where wounded men waited for evacuation. Evans had watched the attack from his gun emplacement. Fire turned the beach into a furnace. Explosions hurled debris 300 feet into the sky. Mariners ran through flames trying to reach the wounded. Most never made it. 77 more were injured. 4 belonged to the 9th Defense Battalion's 19 gun crews. The battalion lost 2 of its 6.155 long-tom artillery pieces. Trucks liquefied. Ammunition detonated for 6 hours straight. The Japanese had named their target well. Suicide Point rested on the northern tip of Renova. Every supply ship had to move past it. Every Marine on the island could watch it burn. Evans and his gun crew had fired 32 rounds that day, hit nothing. The bombers came in too fast. The radar operators were effectively blind. Gun directors calculate intercept with binoculars and stopwatches. By the time shells reached altitude, the Bettys were gone. That night, Lieutenant Colonel William Shire gathered the 19 crews. He didn't waste breath. The radar sets were destroyed. Replacement parts wouldn't arrive for days. The Japanese would return. They always returned. And next time, there might not be enough. Marines left to bury the dead. Evans cleaned his gun until 0300. The 90mm1 anti-aircraft gun weighed 9 tons. It could loft a 24-pound shell to 33,000 feet. Maximum rate of fire was 28 rounds per minute. But none of that mattered without radar. The Japanese Mitsubishi 4M Betty bomber had a top speed of about 270 miles per hour. At that velocity, bomber crossed 2 miles in 27 seconds. Human vision and manual calculators simply couldn't track that fast. The 9th Defense Battalion had landed on Renova on June 30th. Their mission was straightforward. Protect the beachhead while Army artillery shelled Japanese positions on New Georgia across the channel. The battalion had brought 3 batteries of 19 guns, 4 per battery, 12 in total. They were supposed to build an umbrella of flak no Japanese aircraft could penetrate. Instead, they had become practice targets. If you want to see how Evans and his team turned Suicide Point into a graveyard for Japanese bombers, please hit that like button. It helps us share more stories about Marines who fought in the Pacific. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Evans. July 3rd arrived with relentless rain. Rain that transformed Renova into a bog. Marines stood guard duty with water up to their knees. Supplies rotted on the shore, but the storm brought one blessing. The Japanese didn't fly in heavy weather. The 9th Defense Battalion used the lull to repair whatever they could. Salvage crews pulled parts from shattered equipment. Mechanics worked through the night. By dawn on July 4th, something had shifted. The radar operators reported their SCR-268 sets were operational again, not perfect, but functioning. Gun directors checked their systems. Fire control networks were green. Communications linked all 12 gun positions. Evans stacked shells into the ready rack. His crew ran through their drills. Loader, rammer, fuse setter, gunner. They had practiced it 10,000 times in training. But training never prepared you for Bettys dropping bombs on your friends. At T0845, radar picked up a large formation inbound from Rabaul. Distance 120 miles. Bearing 320. Altitude 14,000 feet. The formation moved straight down the slot toward Renova. Shire gave the order. Every gun crew braced themselves. This time, they had radar. This time, they would see the Japanese coming. And this time, Evan Evans was about to prove that one man with a 19 gun could rewrite the mathematics of air defense. The question was whether he would survive long enough to witness it. The radar team called out updates every 30 seconds. The Japanese formation had divided. One group veered toward New Georgia. The other kept coming directly at Renova 16 bombers and 180 fighters as escort. They were dropping altitude. Now, 12,000 feet. The combat air patrol had been drawn north to intercept another strike. Renova's guns were on their own. Evans stared at his gun director. The system was a Sperry M4 mechanical computer. It received radar information and calculated where shells needed to detonate to hit a moving target. The director sent electronic signals to the gun mount. The mount adjusted automatically on paper anyway. In practice, the M4 was designed for optical tracking. It had never been meant to function with radar input. The link was clumsy, unreliable. The best gun crews placed their shells within 200 meters of a target. A 19 round had a burst radius of only about 50 meters. That meant you needed several guns firing to have any hope of a hit. But Evans didn't have multiple guns. He had a single weapon, Battery C, Gun 3. The formation reached 70 miles out. Radar showed them in a tight V formation textbook Japanese bomber tactics. The Bettys would come in at medium altitude, release their bombs, then bank hard and race for home while the Zeros tore apart any fighters daring to chase them. Renova had no fighters. A TO-915. The air raid siren began its wail. Every Marine on the island knew exactly what that sound meant. Men sprinted for foxholes. Medics grabbed their kits. Thek stopped unloading supply ships and took cover. The beach that had been crowded with activity 30 seconds earlier was suddenly empty. Except for the gun crews, they stayed at their positions. Evans checked his ammunition, high explosive shells with variable time fuses. The fuse setter could adjust detonation time in half-second increments. At 10,000 ft, a shell traveled for about 18 seconds before exploding. If the timing was wrong by even 1 second, the shell would burst too high or too low, miss by half a mile. 50 miles out now. The Japanese were at 10,000 feet and holding steady. That altitude put them above most of the light anti-aircraft fire, but well within range of the 90mm guns. The bomber crews knew Renova had big guns. They'd seen the flak 2 days ago. They weren't worried. American anti-aircraft fire was notoriously inaccurate. The Japanese had been flying through it for 18 months. Most crews considered it more of an inconvenience than a threat. They were about to learn otherwise. At 30 m, Scheer gave the order to commence firing. All 12 guns opened up simultaneously. The sound was overwhelming. Each gun fired a shell every 3 seconds. 24 lb projectile escalate into the sky at 2,800 feet per s. The noise made speech impossible. The concussion from the muzzle blast knocked dust off sandbags. Evans settled into the rhythm. His crew had practiced anti-levery. Movement was automatic. The loader grabbed a shell from the ready rack. The rammer shoved it into the breech. The fuse setter dialed in the time. The breech closed. The gun fired. The empty shell casing ejected. The whole sequence took 3 seconds. Load, ram, set, fire. Load, ram, set, fire. The radar operators were tracking the Japanese formation with precision. Now, the repaired SCR-268 was feeding data to Thagan directors faster than the mechanical computers could process it. The M4 calculators were clicking and whirring. Elevation and azimuth changed constantly as the bombers approached. 20 miles out, the first American shells began bursting at altitude. Black puffs of smoke appeared in the sky ahead of the formation. Too far left, the Japanese adjusted course slightly, kept coming. Evans watched through the gun sight as his shells exploded 500 meters from the lead bomber. Close, but not close enough. The Betty bomber had a wingspan of 82 feet. A near miss meant nothing. Only direct hits or very close bursts could bring down a bomber that size. 15 miles. The Marines had fired 88 rounds. And then something changed. Something that would turn Evan Evans from an unknown private into the deadliest anti-aircraft gunner in the Pacific. But first, he had to survive the next 6 minutes. Because the Japanese bombers were about to start their attack, run, and Evans was directly in their path. At 12 mi, the lead Betty bomber began its descent. The Japanese formation dropped to 8,000 feet. At a altitude, the bombarders would be looking through their sights now, calculating wind speed, adjusting for the island's position. Renova was a stationary target, hard to miss. The radar operators updated their tracking. The Japanese were coming in from the northwest at 260 miles per hour. In 3 minutes, they'd be directly overhead. In 4 minutes, they'd be dropping bombs. Evans kept firing. His gun was heating up. Now, the barrel temperature was rising with each shot. Too hot and the rifling would warp. The gun would become inaccurate. But there was no time to let it cool. The Japanese weren't waiting. Load, ram, set, fire. At 10 miles, something happened that changed everything. Battery C's gun director locked onto the lead bomber. The radar return was strong, clean. Them 4 computer began calculating intercept solutions with unusual precision. The gun elevated 2, adjusted azimuth 3 left. Evans fired. The shell left the barrel at half a mile per second, climbed through 8,000 feet of tropical air. The variable time fuse counted down. 18 seconds after leaving the gun, the shell exploded. 200 meters ahead of the lead Betty, the bomber flew straight into the blast. Shrapnel tore through the right engine. Howling, the engine caught fire immediately. Black smoke poured from the inlet. The pilot tried to maintain formation. The Japanese didn't break formation easily. Training and discipline kept them flying straight, but the fire spread. Within 30 seconds, flames were visible along the entire right wing. The bomber dropped out of formation, started losing altitude. The pilot had 2 choices. Try to reach Renova and drop his bombs, or turn back toward Japanese-held territory and hope to crash land somewhere survivable. He chose to turn back. The Betty rolled right and began a shallow descent toward the channel. It never made it. At 6,000 ft, the right wing separated from the fuselage. The bomber tumbled out of the sky and hit the water for miles northwest of Renova. 1 down, 15 to go. The remaining bombers tightened their formation. They were at 7 miles now, close enough that Evans could see them without binoculars. The Bettys looked like dark crosses against the morning sky. Their bomb bay doors were opening. Battery fired again and again. The other 90mm guns across Renova joined in. The sky filled with black bursts. The Japanese formation disappeared into a cloud of flak. When the smoke cleared, 2 more Bettys were trailing smoke. One had lost its tail section. It went into an immediate spin. The other tried to maintain altitude, but was losing power from both engines. Neither made it past 5 miles from the island. 3 down. The Japanese bombarders released early. They were supposed to fly directly over Renova before dropping. Instead, they dumped their loads at 6 miles out and turned hard to the west. Bombs fell into empty ocean. Massive geysers of water erupted half a mile from shore. Not a single bomb hit the island. Evans died and stopped firing. His crew didn't pause. The Japanese were running now, but they were still in range. The Bettys were fast, but they'd spent fuel getting to Renova. They were heavy with armor and defensive guns, and they were trying to climb to escape the flak. Climbing made them slower. Predictable. Battery C's gun director tracked a bomber in the middle of the formation. Evans adjusted his aim. Fired. The shell burst 50 meters below the bomber's belly. Close enough. The concussion wave hit the aircraft like a hammer. The Betty's nose pitched down. The pilot fought for control. He didn't get it. The bomber entered a divot couldn't recover from. 4 down. The remaining 12 Bettys were splitting up now. Formation discipline had broken. Each pilot was flying for his own survival. Some headed west toward New Georgia. Others turned northwest, back toward Rabaul. The Zero escort had disappeared entirely. The fighters had seen enough, but the Marines hadn't. And in the next 60 seconds, Evans and Battery C were about to add 8 more bombers to their tally. 8 more kills. That would make July 4, 1943, the single deadliest day in the history of Japanese naval aviation over Thessaloniki if the gun barrel held out. The gun barrel was glowing now. Evans could see heat waves rising from the metal. The crew had fired 42 rounds in 7 minutes. The 90mm M1 was designed for sustained fire, but not like this. Not at this rate. The barrel temperature was approaching critical levels. Evans didn't care. Neither did his crew. They kept loading. A Betty bomber broke westering to escape over New Georgia. It was climbing hard. 9,000 feet. The pilot thought altitude would save him. It didn't. Battery C's radar locked on. The gun director calculated the intercept. Evans fired twice in quick succession. The first shell missed high. The second shell exploded 30 meters behind the bomber's tail. Shrapnel severed the elevator controls. The Betty's nose dropped. The pilot tried to compensate with engine power. The bomber went into a flat spin and crashed into the jungle 3 miles inland on New Georgia. 5 down. 2 more Bettys were heading northwest together. They were flying low, now, 5,000 feet, trying to stay under the radar. It didn't work. Renova's SCR-268 could track targets down to 3,000 ft. The gun directors had clear returns on both aircraft. Battery C took the lead bomber. Battery E took the trailer. Both guns fired within seconds of each other. Both scored hits. The lead Betty took a direct hit to the port engine. The engine exploded. The wing folded. The bomber rolled inverted and went straight down into Blanche's channel. The second Betty lost its tail section. It flew for another 8 seconds before entering an uncontrollable dive. 7 down. The sky over Renova was filled with smoke. Now, burning aircraft debris was falling into the ocean. Oil slick spread across the water. The remaining 9 Japanese bombers were scattered across a 10 mi radius. No formation, no coordination, just individual pilots trying to survive. 3 Bettys turned due west, heading for the open ocean. They were abandoning the mission, running for home. But home was 400 meters away, and they had to cross 200 meters of ocean that was now filling with American shells. Battery tracked the nearest bomber. Range 8 miles, altitude 7,000 feet, speed 280 miles per hour. The bomber was running at full power, probably burning fuel at twice the normal rate. The crew would be lucky to make it halfway to Rabble before they ran dry. They didn't get the chance. Evans fired 3 rounds. The third one exploded directly underneath the bomber's fuselage. The blast tore through the bomb bay. The Betty hadn't dropped all its ordnance. 500 lb bombs detonated inside the aircraft. The explosion was massive. Pieces of the bomber scattered across half a mile of ocean. 8 down. The other batteries across Renova were getting hits now too. Battery E claimed 2 more bombers in quick succession. Battery A got another. The sky was becoming a shooting gallery. The Japanese had sent 16 bombers to destroy Renova. Instead, Renova was destroying them. Evans swung his gun to track another Betty. This one was heading due north. Maximum range, 10 miles out. The bomber was at 11,000 feet and climbing. The pilot had figured out that altitude was his only chance. Get high enough and the American shells couldn't reach him. But 11,000 feet was well within the 90mm range. The M1 could fire effectively to 33,000 feet. This bomber was barely a third of that. Evans elevated the gun to maximum. Fired. Theshel climbed for 22 seconds. Exploded 200 meters ahead of the bomber. The pilot soft burst and turned hard right directly into the next shell. The blast hit the cockpit. The Betty's nose shattered. The aircraft tumbled out of control and fell into the ocean 9 miles north of Renova. 9 down. By 9:30, the sky was clearing. The Japanese attack was over, broken, destroyed. Of the 16 Betty bombers that had approached Renova, only 4 were still flying. They were heading northwest at maximum speed, climbing, running. The Zero escort had already abandoned them and fled back toward Rabel, but Battery C wasn't finished. Evans tracked one of the retreating bombers. Range 12 miles. Maximum effective range for accurate fire. The bomber was at 14,000 feet on the edge off flak zone. Evans fired anyway. The shell arced through the sky, exploded 300 meters from the bomber, too far for a kill, but close enough to send a message. Renova wasn't suicide point anymore. It was a killing ground, and the Japanese had just learned that the hard way. The question was whether they'd be back tomorrow, and whether Evans and his gun would be ready. The ceasefire order came at 09:32, 27 minutes after the first radar contact. The guns fell silent. The sudden quiet was almost painful after the continuous roar of the 90mm cannons. Evans stepped back from his gun. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from exhaustion. His ears were ringing so badly he could barely hear. The gun crew collapsed against the sandbags. They'd been firing non-stop for 27 minutes. Load, ram, set, fire, over and over, until their bodies moved on pure muscle memory. The gunner's log showed 53 rounds fired from Battery C's gun 3 alone. Across Renova, the 12 90mm guns had expended a total of 88 rounds. 88 shells to engage 16 bombers. The results were unprecedented. Shai walked the gun line at 010. He was counting. Every gun crew was claiming kills. Some crews claimed 2. Battery C claimed 4 confirmed. Battery A claimed 3. Battery A claimed 2. The math was adding up to something extraordinary. By 0:30, the radar operators confirmed what the gun crews already knew. 4 Japanese bombers had escaped. 4 out of 16. That meant 12 had gone down. 12 bombers destroyed in 27 minutes. The 9th Defense Battalion had just set a record. No American anti-aircraft unit in the Pacific had ever achieved that kill ratio. Not at Guadalcanal, at Midway, not anywhere. 12 bombers with 88 rounds meant a hit rate of nearly 14%. Most anti-aircraft units were happy with 2%. But the numbers didn't tell the whole story. The gun crews had done more than shoot down airplanes. They'd broken a Japanese attack completely. 16 bombers had approached Renova carrying 8,000 lb off bombs each. That was 128,000 lb of high explosives, meant for the beach, for Thessaloniki dumps, for the Marines. Not one bomb hit the island. The Japanese had dumped their loads early and run. The 4 bombers that escaped were damaged. Radar tracked them limping northwest at treadist speed and altitude. 2 of them probably wouldn't make it back to Rabaul. They'd run out of fuel somewhere over the Solomon Sea and ditch in the ocean. By 1,100 hours, work parties were recovering debris from the water. Pieces of Japanese aircraft were washing up on the beach. Engine cowlings, wing sections, a tail assembly with the red circle still visible. The wreckage spread across 5 miles of ocean. The Seabees returned to unloading supply ships. The beach came back to life. Marines, who'd been hiding in foxholes, emerged and went back to work. Life on Renova continued. But something had changed. The island that had been called Suicide Point 2 days ago had just proven it could defend itself. Evans cleaned his gun at 1,300 hours. The barrel was too hot to touch even 3 hours after the last shot. The rifling was still intact. No warping, no damage. The M1 had held up under punishment that should have destroyed it. The other gun crews were doing the same, cleaning, inspecting, reloading. The Japanese would be back. They always came back. But next time, they'd remember July 4th. They'd remember that Renova wasn't an easy target anymore. At 1,500 hours, a photographer from the Marine Corps' combat camera unit arrived at Battery C. He wanted pictures. The gun crew that scored the most kills. Evans and his crew stood beside their 90mm gun. Boone in the left, Evans in the middle, Gamborowski on the right. 3 Marines who just made history. The photographer took 6 pictures. Only one survived the war. It ended up in the National Archives as Photo 127GW. The caption read, "This is one of the anti-aircraft guns which wiped out a Japanese bomber fleet of 12 planes in a single day at Renovi Island." But that photograph was taken in the afternoon. In the morning, while the battle was still being analyzed, while gun crews were still counting their kills, something else was happening. 400 meters northwest, at Rabaul, Japanese commanders swear receiving reports from the 4 bombers that had escaped. The reports were alarming. The Americans had radar-directed anti-aircraft fire, accurate radar, the kind that could track bombers through clouds and guide shells to within meters of the target. And that meant every Japanese airbase in the Solomons had just become vulnerable, because if Renova could do this, other American positions could too. The mathematics of air combat in the Pacific had just changed. The Japanese would need to adjust their tactics or stop flying daylight raids altogether. But that decision would take days to make. And in those days, Evan Evans and the 99th Defense Battalion would face something even more dangerous than bombers. They would face their own command. The first message from Admiral Halley's headquarters arrived at 1600 hours on July 4th. It was short, 3 words. Confirm kill count. Sure, confirmed. 12 Japanese Betty bombers destroyed. 4 damaged and fleeing. 88 rounds expended. 0 American casualties during the engagement. 0 bombs hit the island. The second message arrived 30 minutes later. This one was longer. Halley wanted a full after-action report. He wanted to know how a Marin Defense Battalion had achieved a 90% destruction rate against a Japanese bomber formation. He wanted technical details, radar settings, fire control procedures, everything. Because if Renova could do this, every American position in the Pacific needed to know how. Shent, the evening of July 4th, writing reports. The radar operators wrote reports. The gun directors wrote reports. Every gun crew documented their procedures, how they'd integrated the SCR-268 radar with the Sperry M for gun director, how they'd adjusted for the lag in the mechanical computer, how they'd calculated lead time for fast-moving targets. The reports went up the chain of command from Renova to 14th Corps headquarters, from 14th Corps to South Pacific Area Command, from South Pacific to Pacific Fleet. By July 6th, officers at Pearl Harbor were reading about Evan Evans and Battery C, but while the reports were being written, the Japanese were making dozens of their own. On July 5th, Rabel sent 6 bombers to attack Renova, only 6. They came in at night, high altitude, dropped their bombs from 2000 missed the island completely. The 90mm guns fired 37 rounds and claimed 2 hits. The remaining bombers turned back before reaching the target. On July 6th, the Japanese tried again. 4 bombers. Same result. High altitude, night attack. No hits on the island. 1 bomber shot down. The pattern was clear. The Japanese had learned. Daylight raids on Renova were suicide. The radar-directed anti-aircraft fire was too accurate, too deadly. If they wanted to attack American positions in the New Georgia Group, they'd have to find another way. By July 10th, Japanese air raids on Renova had stopped almost entirely. One attack on July 20th, 6 planes. Another on August 1st, 6 planes. Both high-altitude raids that accomplished nothing. The Japanese had effectively conceded the airspace over Renova to American anti-aircraft guns. The 99th Defense Battalion's success had strategic consequences. With Renova secure, the 155mm long Tom artillery batteries could fire without interruption. They pounded Japanese positions on New Georgia across Blanche Channel 24 hours a day. The big guns made the American advance on Munda airfield possible. Munda fell on August 5th. The airfield that had been the primary Japanese airbase in the Central Solomons was now in American hands. Marine and Army engineers had it operational within 72 hours. American fighters were flying missions from Munda by August 14th. The campaign that had started with the Renova landings on June 30th was over in 5 weeks. The 9th Defense Battalion moved to New Georgia in October to defend the newly captured airfield. They set up their guns around Munda and waited for Japanese counterattacks. The attacks never came. The Japanese had abandoned the Central Solomons. They were falling back to Bougainville. The momentum had shifted. The Americans were advancing. The Japanese were retreating. Evans and his crew spent 6 months on New Georgia. They fired their 90mm gun at occasional reconnaissance aircraft. They shot down 3 more planes. But nothing compared to July 4th. That day remained unique. The day when everything worked. When the radar locked on. When the shells found their targets. When 12 Japanese bombers fell from the sky in 27 minutes. The official Marine Corps' history would later call it one of the most successful anti-aircraft engagements of the Pacific War. The guns had performed beyond expectations. The crews had executed flawlessly. The Japanese had been stopped cold. But there was a cost. A cost that didn't show up in the kill reports or the after-action summaries. A cost that Evan Evans and every other gun crew member would carry for the rest of their lives. Because shooting down 12 bombers meant killing more than 100 Japanese aircrew. And some of those men had survived the crashes. Some had parachuted into the ocean. Some had struggled in the water while American ships steamed past without stopping. War had rules. But sometimes the rules didn't matter. Sometimes survival meant watching men drown. And sometimes heroes had to live with what they'd done to stay alive. The 99th Defense Battalion remained on New Georgia until March 1944. They defended Munda airfield against attacks that never materialized. The Japanese had moved their bombers north to Rabaul. They were conserving aircraft for the defense of the Marianas. The Central Solomons had become a backwater. Evans was promoted to corporal in October 1943. Boone made corporal in December. Gamborowski stayed private first class until January 1944. The promotions came with citations, official recognition for their actions on July 4th, but no medals. Defense battalion personnel rarely received medals for anti-aircraft work. Shooting down planes was considered routine duty. In April 1944, the battalion shipped to the Russell Islands for rest and retraining. 6 months of combat had worn down men and equipment. The 90mm guns needed barrel replacements. Fire control systems needed recalibration. The Marines needed time away from the gun positions. They got 6 weeks. Then new orders arrived. The battalion was going to Guam. The landing on Guam began July 21, 1944. The 99th Defense Battalion came ashore at Agate on the first day. They set up their anti-aircraft guns around the beachhead. Their mission was air defense and perimeter security. The Japanese had fortified Guam heavily. The island had been in Japanese hands since December 1941. 22,000 Japanese troops were dug into the jungle and limestone caves. The battle for Guam lasted 3 weeks. The 99th Defense Battalion fired their guns at Japanese aircraft and ground targets. They shot down 4 more planes. They used their 90mm guns in direct fire mode against Japanese positions on the northern cliffs. High explosive shells proved effective against fortified bunkers. But the real enemy on Guam wasn't the Japanese. It was dengue fever. The disease swept through the battalion in August. Hundreds of Marines fell ill. High fever, joint pain, exhaustion. Dengue wasn't fatal, but it was incapacitating. Men who could fight through enemy fire couldn't function with dengue. Evans caught it in mid-August. He spent 2 weeks in a field hospital, lost 20 lb. When he returned to duty, the battle for Guam was over. The Japanese had retreated to the northern cliffs. Thousands committed suicide by jumping rather than surrendering. The 99th Defense Battalion stayed on Guam for the rest of the war. They defended Appa Harbor and the newly built airfield. American B-29 super fortresses were flying bombing missions against Japan from Guam by October 1944. The 9th's job was to protect them. The Japanese launched occasional air raids, small formations, 4 or 5 planes, night attacks mostly. The 99th Defense Battalion shot down 6 more aircraft between September 1944 and March 1945. Their total for the war reached 46 confirmed kills. 46 Japanese aircraft destroyed by 1 Marine Defense Battalion. July 4, 1943 remained their best day. 12 kills in an engagement. No American anti-aircraft unit in the Pacific ever matched that record. Evans was on Guam when the war ended in August 1945. He was a sergeant by then. 24 years old. 3 years in the Marines. 2 Pacific campaigns. 46 enemy aircraft shot down by his battalion. 12 of them on one morning when everything worked perfectly. The 99th Defense Battalion returned to the United States in February 1946. They sailed into San Diego Harbor on the 23rd. The battalion was deactivated on March 1st at Camp Leune, North Carolina. The Marines went home, back to Indiana, back to Michigan, back to lives interrupted by war. Evans returned to Richmond, Indiana. He'd left as a 21-year-old private. He came back as a decorated sergeant, but Richmond was the same. The war had changed Evans more than Evans had changed Richmond. He re-enlisted in 1948, served through the Korean War, made staff sergeant, left the Marine Corps in 195,311 years of service, 2 wars. He worked as a machinist after that, married, had children, lived a quiet life. But he never forgot July 4, 1943, the day the planes fell, the day Suicide Point became a graveyard, the day 88 shells killed 12 bombers and changed the mathematics of air defense in the Pacific. He never talked about it much. Most veterans didn't. The ones who'd been there knew what happened. The ones who hadn't been there would understand. So Evans kept it quiet, worked his job, raised his family, lived his life until 1993, 50 years after Renova. When a Marine Corps researcher found the photograph in the National Archives and tracked down the men in the picture, Evans was 72 years old. He thought everyone had forgotten. He was wrong. In 1993, Alan Walker was an archivist at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. He received a letter from a veteran named Evan Evans. The letter was simple. Evans was looking for a photograph of a 90mm anti-aircraft gun. Any photo would do. He wanted to show his grandchildren what the gun looked like. Walker spent half a day searching. He found plenty of photos of the M1 gun, but something about the letter stayed with him. He read it again. Evans mentioned Renova, mentioned July 4, 1943, mentioned setting air record for shooting down Japanese bombers. Walker went back to the archives. This time, he searched under Renova Series 127GW, combat photographs from the New Georgia camping. He found it on the 4th page. 3 Marines standing beside a 90mm gun. The caption identified them. Private First Class Evan Evans, 22, Richmond, Indiana. Private Roy E. Boone, Indianapolis, Indiana. Private First Class John S. Gimberski, 20, Sagan, Michigan. This is one of the anti-aircraft guns which wiped out a Japanese bomber fleet of 12 planes in a single day at WWII Island. Walker sent the photograph to Evans. The response came 2 weeks later. Evans had never known the photo existed. He'd never expected anyone remembered. Seeing himself at 22 years old, standing beside the gun that had made history, brought back 50 years of memories he tried to forget. He wrote Walker a letter thanking him. Said it meant more than Walker could know. Said he'd carried Renova with him every day for 5 decades. Said maybe now he could let some of it go. Evans died in 2004 at age 83. Boone had died in 1998. Gamber Alskapazid. In 2006, the gun crew that had made history on July 4, 1943 was gone, but the story survived. The photograph survived. The official record survived. The 99th Defense Battalion's achievement at Renova became part of Marine Corps' history, part of the larger story of how American forces learned to defeat Japanese air power in the Pacific. The lessons from Renova spread through the theater. Radar-directed anti-aircraft fire became standard procedure. Gun crews trained on the integration techniques the 99th Defense Battalion had pioneered. The kill radio improved across the board. Japanese bombers faced increasingly lethal defensive fire at every American position. By 1944, Japanese daylight bombing missions had become uncommon. By 1945, they had nearly ceased entirely. The Japanese couldn't replace their losses quickly enough, couldn't train new crews rapidly enough. The calculations that Evan Evans and Battery C had proven on July 4, 1943, had spread across the entire Pacific. 12 bombers shot down in 27 minutes, 88 shells fired, 90 destruction rate. Those figures demonstrated that American technology And American Marines could defeat Japanese air attacks. That suicide point could be turned into a deadly zone for the enemy instead of Americans. The beach at Renova is quiet now. The guns are gone. The bunkers have collapsed. The jungle has overtaken most of the positions where the 9th Defense Battalion fought. Bhutan, July 4th. Each year, a few remember. Remember the day the planes fell. Remember Evan Evans, Roy Boone, and John Gamborofsky. Remember 3 young Marines changed the course of air defense in the Pacific. If this story resonated with you the way it moved us, do us a favor and hit that like button. Every like signals YouTube to share this story with more people. Subscribe and enable notifications. We're bringing forgotten stories out of dusty archives, everyday stories about gunners, radar operators, and Marines who held the line with skill and courage. Real people, real heroism. Leave a comment now and tell us where you are watching from. Are you tuning in from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, or Australia? Our community pans the globe. You're not just a viewer, you're part of preserving these memories. Share your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know. You're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for ensuring Evan Evans and his crew do not fade into silence. These Marines deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.